Nietzsche on the Genealogy of Morals, Part 1, Section 5. With regard to our problem, which may on good grounds be called a quiet problem, and one which fastidiously directs itself to few ears, it is of no small interest to ascertain that through those words and roots which designate good, there frequently still shines the most important nuance by virtue of which the noble felt themselves to be men of a higher rank. Granted that, in the majority of cases, they designate themselves simply by their superiority in power as the powerful, the masters, the commanders, or by the most clearly visible signs of this superiority, for example, as the rich, the possessors. This is the meaning of Arya, and of corresponding words in Iranian and Slavic. But they also do it by a typical character trait. And this is the case that concerns us here. They call themselves, for instance, the truthful. This is so above all of the Greek nobility, whose mouthpiece is the Megarian poet Theognis. The root of the word coined for this, esthlos, signifies one who is, who possesses reality, who is actual, who is true. Then, with a subjective term, the true as the truthful. In this phase of conceptual transformation, it becomes a slogan and catchword of the nobility and passes over entirely into the sense of noble, as distinct from the lying common man, which is what Theognis takes him to be and how he describes him, until finally, after the decline of the nobility, the word is left to designate nobility of soul and becomes, as it were, ripe and sweet. In the word kakos, as in delos, the plebeian in contradistinction to the agathos, cowardice is emphasized. This perhaps gives an indication in which direction one should seek the etymological origin of agathos, which is susceptible of several interpretations. The Latin malus, beside which I set melas, may designate the common man as the dark-colored, above all, as the black-haired man, hic niger est, as the pre-Aryan occupant of the soil of Italy, who was distinguished most obviously from the blonde, that is, Aryan conqueror race by his color. Gaelic, at any rate, offers us a precisely similar case. Finn, for example, in the name Fingal, the distinguishing word for nobility, finally, for the good, noble, pure, originally meant the blonde-headed, in contradistinction to the dark, black-haired aboriginal inhabitants. The Celts, by the way, were definitely a blonde race. It is wrong to associate traces of an essentially dark-haired people, which appear on the more careful ethnographical maps of Germany with any sort of Celtic origin or blood mixture, as Virchow still does. It is rather the pre-Aryan people of Germany who emerge in these places. The same is true of virtually all Europe. The suppressed race has gradually recovered the upper hand again, in coloring, shortness of skull, perhaps even in the intellectual and social instincts. Who can say whether modern democracy, even more modern anarchism, and especially that inclination for commune, for the most primitive form of society, which is now shared by all the socialists of Europe, does not signify in the main a tremendous counterattack, and that the conqueror and master race, the Aryan, is not succumbing physiologically too. I believe I may venture to interpret the Latin bonus as the warrior, provided I am right in tracing bonus back to the earlier duonus. Compare bellum, equivalent to duellum, equivalent to duenlum, which seems to me to contain duonus. Therefore, bonus as the man of strife, of dissension, duo, as the man of war. One sees what constituted the goodness of a man in ancient Rome. Our German Gut, even, does it not signify the godlike, the man of godlike race? And is it not identical with the popular, originally noble name of the Goths? The grounds for this conjecture cannot be dealt with here. Okay, so this is sort of an unusually data-heavy aphorism for the book. He's giving us quite a lot of sort of etymological demonstrations of the pattern that he's already been describing, where initially the language's most primitive term to express goodness is tied to nothing but the power of the powerful, and that they tend, as the language evolves, to adopt some sort of specific or typical character trait of the ruling class. The blonde hair that he refers to with respect to the Celts, or the habit of being the truthful ones, as opposed to the lying beggars. These again, just reiterating that the most primitive concept of good is nothing but the self-praise of the ruling class. It has no real moral content whatsoever. Now, Nietzsche gets into some pretty uncomfortable territory here, I think, when he starts talking about race, and we can it's not hard to see that this would have been probably one of the passages that his sister Elizabeth Förster Nietzsche would have sort of taken out of context in her attempt to re-edit her brother's work into a piece of right-wing fascist propaganda, proto-Nazi propaganda, essentially. That, I think, is obviously an abuse of Nietzsche's work, though I don't think he's entirely innocent from the charge of racism. He does seem to think that races are real things, rather than just ideological concepts, or social constructions. He seems to feel that race actually does have some kind of material reality to it, and I would definitely depart from him there, and I don't even think that it's necessarily worth critiquing that far. The only other thing I'd want to say about this passage, which again is more just a body of evidence rather than an argument, is just to emphasize that in looking back to origins, and establishing that in general the term good is really just a designation of power, we shouldn't suppose that means that that's the legitimate meaning of the word good. Just because something is original, I don't think in Nietzsche's conception that means that it's authentic, or that it has some kind of a right to exist. I think he's got a much subtler view of origins, and would likely, I think, be very sympathetic to ideas like Eric Hobsbawm's notion of invented traditions, the idea that origins are always more or less prosthetic and imaginary, and we can never really trace anything far enough back to say that we've captured its origin. Likewise, there's no reason to suppose that what a thing was like at its origin represents what it should be like eternally. There's nothing legitimating or authenticating about the condition in which a thing first came to be. That shouldn't have to govern its fate, or its character. So just a little bit of an aside for this rather dense and somewhat troubling passage.